Neil is the president of the South African Chamber of Commerce in the USA, SACCUSA, it's called. He's based in the USA, and he's going to give us some insights on the US-South Africa relations and how business is navigating beyond politics to build economic bridges. So very excited to have you on board. Thank you, Neil, for your time. I know you've been in the media a lot in the last few months. But before going into the nitty-gritty, can you give the audience just a bit of background on yourself, where you're from, where you're based, how long you've been abroad, and what do you do outside of the chamber? And then, we'll hear from you, and we'll have a few one. It's probably time for one or two questions at the end. So over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Jason, and good morning from the US. Good afternoon to you guys in the UK and across the rest of the world. I'm Neil Diamond, as Jason said. I'm president of the South African Chamber of Commerce in the US. I moved to the US in 2019 from the beautiful Lowveld town of Nelspruit, or Mbombela, as folks know it these days. So greetings to everybody that's got ties to Mpumalanga and to the Lowveld. My family moved over to the US in 2018. I joined them end of 2019, and our company deals with the distribution of identity and credential management and solutions. Just in a nutshell, any of you that have an ID card or an access card to get into your building or into your office, that is basically what our company does, both on the back end, the software, but also on the front end, the actual production of those cards and the distribution from the manufacturer of those cards. So in the United States, it was important for me to connect with some other business people, and that's how I ended up with the South African Chamber of Commerce. And it's definitely been a journey, a very interesting last few years, and we've had some amazing projects as the South African Chamber to promote and advance binational trade between South Africa and the United States. We've got a New York Business Council that represents all our high-end individuals that have got businesses in the New York Stock Exchange or on the capital markets. And it's really been a very exciting time. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened the last 6 weeks. So when President Trump took office, we welcomed a change in the administration. But we didn't, in our wildest dreams, envisage that we would have such a big policy change, which was welcomed out of many areas, especially in the United States, that there is a greater focus on US domestic policy and a US first approach by the administration. What makes it a little bit more difficult is if you've got one foot in South Africa and one foot in the US, and you are trying to navigate that business relationship in and amongst an absolute diplomatic storm. In the last 6 to 7 weeks, we've seen new lows almost weekly occur in the binational relationship. As South Africans in the United States, obviously we are aligned to what happens in the US, and it's important for us to ensure that that alignment remains intact with the Trump administration. But at the same time, a lot of us do business back in South Africa and on the African continent. So sharing some of the challenges that we've experienced, I think is important because none of us know or can prepare for really what lay ahead and what could happen in any other country of the world. The US, being the largest consumer market on the planet, took an approach that for decades, the US foreign policy has been to support binational trade and bilateral trade, multilateral trade with various countries, including South Africa, and that has not always favored the United States. So what we're seeing now is basically a reset to bring the US back to where it's supposed to be, looking after its own domestic issues and focusing on its own economy, making the US stronger, safer, and more economic prosperous. At the same junction, we look at South Africa and where the US-South Africa relationships are moving to. We first saw an executive order on February 7th where President Trump basically ended all aid to South Africa. The value of that's roughly 440 million US dollars. 2 weeks ago, we saw the expulsion of Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, and we've seen South Africa being highlighted throughout this process. Now, where does this place us as business? At the end of the day, we've had to take a very firm approach whether we are going to get involved in this political conundrum or whether we are going to steer clear. Now, business and politics are always closely aligned. Tariffs are things that's set by politicians, but it affects us as business. So we took a firm approach that we need to move beyond politics. And our narrative for the next 4 years is going to be business beyond politics. We want to focus on economic diplomacy, building those economic bridges between our two countries, and ensuring that business can continue flowing between the United States and South Africa. I think both the White House and Pretoria will acknowledge that the relationship between South Africa and the US is a mutually beneficial economic relationship. There's no doubts about that. We do disagree in terms of certain policy positions in the implementation of certain domestic legislative frameworks within South Africa. And then I think the US is not unfair if they say, if you want to do business with the US, you need to be a friend of the United States. And I think that's in very simple terms. It doesn't mean that you can't be friends with other people, but let's not use that as a point of departure for our relationship. Let's look at what unites us rather than what divides us in terms of this relationship. But ultimately, we've seen a complete breakdown of the relationship between the Trump administration and South Africa. And the question is, how are we going to ensure as business that we remain steadfast and resolute in our relationship, both in the side of the United States, but also on the side of South Africa? So one of the frameworks in terms of which we do a lot of bi-national trade with South Africa is under AGOA. That's the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It's not a trade agreement. It's a legislative framework whereby the US allows South African manufacturers and producers to export their goods tariff-free to the United States. Now, just a basic implication of us not continuing in AGOA would be in the automotive sector, where NAMASA, the National Automobile Manufacturers Association, estimates that approximately 80,000 jobs in that sector is dependent on AGOA and exports to the United States for automotive auto parts. The big beneficiaries there are the US automakers, number one being the Ford Motor Corporation. So should South Africa exit AGOA, it's going to have a significant impact on South Africa, but it would also have an impact on the United States. It would definitely increase costs of auto components being exported. But the US is resilient and it can definitely find alternative markets and manufacturers across the globe that would be willing to fill that gap. The question would be, can South Africa weather a storm where it loses 80,000 jobs? Then we've got 600 US listed entities on the New York Stock Exchange or at the NASDAQ that operates in South Africa and throughout the region or headquartered in South Africa. And those 600 large companies employs roughly 150,000 people in South Africa. So we're not necessarily saying that they would relocate from that space, but there would be an impact on them. And South Africa is not the darling that it used to be. We're seeing a very strong draw card from countries like Kenya, folks relocating their regional offices to Nairobi. It's more centrally placed, closer to Europe, and serves the EMEA market a lot better than what they do in South Africa. Nothing beats a braai or a wine tour in Cape Town, and that's why many of these companies are there. But we should also be clear, things need to make economic sense. And in that regard, we need to offer the best possible value proposition for US companies to remain in South Africa. We also think that South Africa should refocus on finding new markets and maybe looking at diversifying their own economy to ensure that they are not as dependent on trade with the United States. I know that the Department of Trade and Industry regularly indicates that the US is not our biggest trading partner in South Africa, but our second biggest trading partner. But in terms of beneficiated products, this is products that are not just raw materials. The US by far has got a larger percentage of end finished products, which means direct labor involvement in South Africa that's exported to the US, in opposed to a larger volume of raw materials that's exported to China. Just bringing us back to the importance of that relationship with the United States and the continuation of that relationship. So how do we as business weather the storm? I think first and foremost, we're trying to create a bridge economically that hopefully downstream our governments can use to cross over and find one another. We have also realized the importance of establishing our own relationships within the Trump administration on Capitol Hill, but also back in Pretoria. And this is a very tight rope to walk, because you're at a juncture where when you support the one, by implication, you're not in support of the other, or vice versa. So we've kind of pleaded for tolerance and patience across the aisle as we navigate these complexities. How it has impacted us on an actual day-to-day basis. We've had some exciting projects that we've worked on in the past. One of our market activation projects for South African goods in the US market was our participation in the NASCAR event annually. And last year's South African NASCAR was our most successful project of the year. As we look at 2025, we've got concerns whether that project would be as well received in the US as it has been in previous years. And maybe pressing the pause on that in order for us not to lose momentum, but to ensure that we could have these projects when there is more openness to South Africa. Our South Africa Investment Summit in New York is currently on the cards, but we've got concerns whether we would attract the same level of interest from investors, analysts, and banks than what we have historically. And we're seeing that South African companies exploring the US capital markets are finding it slightly more difficult. There also seems to be a lower appetite for emerging markets, but specifically South Africa. And we've seen a lot of US equities withdraw or sell off stocks of South Africa. So as the Chamber, we need to do our part to try and present South Africa in the best and most positive light that we possibly can, because our members are dependent on that business, on that flow of capital and of the binational trade. But it is difficult, and it is a challenge to navigate, and all the political issues and statements that are being made on both sides doesn't really help. It's easy to say that we're going to stay out of the politics, but as you all know, we all have personal views and opinions on this, and our members are no different than the group on this call, which means internally in our chamber, we also need to navigate some of these complexities. But we believe that we should keep our focus on the common goal, and that is to promote binational trade with the United States. For the US to acknowledge that South Africa is a valued partner and the biggest trading partner of the US in Africa, and remains a historic partner of the United States, notwithstanding some of the peripheral issues that have created a diplomatic rift. On the other side, South Africa needs to acknowledge that the relationship with the US is paramount for South Africa to achieve its macroeconomic goals, which is economic growth, job creation, and the alleviation of poverty in South Africa. I think one thing that everybody asks me about is the whole refugee thing. We don't necessarily know how this is going to play out. We recently handed over the names of 67,000 South Africans that knocked up on our door to express their interest or ask for more information. We've exited that space because our core mandate is to promote trade, investment, and tourism, and not to deal with refugees. But we, as the South African diaspora in the US, are looking forward to welcoming South Africans onto our shores, as I'm sure other business communities in the UK, in Dubai, in Mauritius would welcome more South Africans in your communities. We are an amazing people. We are resilient. We add a lot of economic value, and we believe that South Africans could do the exact same for the United States. We are expressing our concern of what impact that would have on South Africa's macroeconomic environment, especially agriculture, if we lose a large scale of our farming community, and what that would mean for South Africa's food security in the long run. But these are all things that we can navigate. And ultimately, as business, we are there to support and to ensure that we are a neutral base through which government can connect And we have got good relationships with our government in South Africa, also with the United States. It is, however, challenging at times, but as a business group, we do our best to navigate this and to support. And we still see a huge interest of South African exporters, especially out of the Western Cape, keen to do business in the United States, bring South African products to the United States. And as the Chamber, we are there to support them. I think I'm going to end off there, and I'm happy to take a couple of questions. Thank you,
Thanks,
Jason.
Neil. That's brilliant. That's really, really useful what you shared with us today. And I had a question with regards to on the refugees, and I suppose going forward, I mean, obviously you had to deal with a lot there, but going forward, if anyone's obviously on the call and they know people that are looking at this, how do they go about it so that they're not contacting yourself, because this is not something that you have the capacity to do, and obviously you help those people. But going forward, what is the process if they wanted to look at that option?
Thank you, Jason. That's a great question. And it applies not just to folks inside South Africa, but South Africans across the globe. And they are welcome to email the US State Department through the US Embassy in Pretoria at email address Pretoria PRM info at state.gov, and express their interest in the US refugee program for South Africans. I see of late they have moved away from the term just Afrikaner, and they are also including the term unfavored or disfavored minorities. So that has kind of been a big discussion. As you can hear, I don't speak English all that bad, even from somebody from Nelspruit, but I am actually Afrikaans, and my name is Neil Diamond. So, where exactly would you fit me into this equation? Am I an Afrikaner? Am I not an Afrikaner?
Yeah. Okay, no,
I
that's
hope
good.
this
So I
is
think let me get that link from you, that email address, and then so that if we can share it with the community and they can use that in need, rather than contacting the Chamber of Commerce, because I think that is outside now of your remit where you don't deal with refugees. So is anyone have any questions for Neil? Just put your hand up or unmute yourself. Feel free to shoot a question. We have time for a couple of questions. If you want to shoot anything through, please do. I don't see anything at this stage. But maybe just what impact has this had, the last 6 weeks, on your members specifically? Do you have any examples of where they've been impacted in this whole interrelation, issue that we're going through?
Yes, thank you, Jason. Another great question. I think the challenge comes in terms of business confidence, and business requires a stable environment in which to thrive. The instability that the diplomatic relationship has caused has definitely paused some of our members in terms of their own expansions in the United States. The concerns on tariffs has put a halt on some of the imports that we've seen into the United States, or exports from South Africa, because there is a concern about how those tariffs would impact the business between the two countries. And we saw that specifically in the manufacturers of leather and shoes
Hmm.
that have reduced. So this is something we're looking at. We are planning to see how we can support them better, working with SAFLEC, the South African Leather and Footwear Export Council, to see how we can stimulate that and provide some guidance that would assist them in that process.
Okay, that's great. I see there's a question here.
Yes, Neil. Hi, my name is Ian. Okay, I'm with BRICS Study Destinations. My question is basically this. From last year, the USA has started putting a capping system on exchange students, student recruitment, and basically that wants to go study that side. Do you think it's going to get worse? Because just from last year, we had about 293 students, 93,000 students from Africa that couldn't get any placement. Do you think it's going to get worse?
Ian, thank you very much, and a very relevant question. Maybe I should just answer it in this way first. We've taken hands with the other African binational chambers in the United States, especially Atlanta, where I'm based. There's a very large concentration of African representation and diaspora. We've identified that the disparity between the students from the US that study in Africa versus the amount of African students that are allowed into the US is approximately 5 to 1. And we've already a year ago started addressing those concerns with the US in terms of a reciprocal allowance for students from both sides to be able to study and experience one another's culture, but also education. The new administration has taken a very firm stance on immigration. I think everything the Trump administration does is to make the US stronger, safer, and economic more prosperous. And I think in that regard, this challenge in the short term may persist and even worsen, Ian. But I'd like you to know that at least we're aware of this problem and that it's something that we have started working on. I think it is going to be on the back burner for the near future, but there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. It's not just going astray, and it's something that we've taken hands with a number of other African countries and their diasporas to address with the US administration.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Thanks.
Because at this part, can I just
Yeah, go for
raise
it.
something quickly? We actually got the opportunity now that a lot of the United Arab Emirates countries and basically BRICS itself are now opening up doors for the students that can't get placement. But I've still got students that ask me to go to the USA. That's why I'm looking at, other alternatives, or I wanted to know what's going on with the USA.
I
But
think just
thank you.
in terms of immigration, you all see the reports of what's happening over there. The Trump administration is taking a very firm stance in terms of that. And they've recently made an announcement that even if you've been issued a visa, it doesn't guarantee your entry into the United States. And they monitor you on an ongoing basis. For any transgressions, your US visa will be revoked.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Sorry, I have to cut you short then. I know there are two other hands up. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for further questions. So please drop your question in the chat group and we can get Neil to respond to those directly. So Neil, thank you very much for today's talk. Really insightful and great updates in terms of what's happening in the US. And we wish you all the best in the role and dealing with what's happening there. And I think also just a quick comment from my side. I think this is where the International Association of South African Chambers, we together under umbrella of other chambers, and we can learn from what the US is going through, so that we better prepared if this ever happens in our own chambers. Hopefully not, but I think this is one of the great areas of collaboration under the umbrella of the International Association of South African Chambers. So thank you, Neil. We're going to now move on to our second breakout session.